The marble floors of Hartwell Industries' 52nd floor gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, each tile reflecting the chaos that had erupted in the executive wing. Emma Hartwell, 17 years old with her father's sharp blue eyes and her late mother's delicate bone structure, sat crumpled against the floor-to-ceiling windows, her designer blazer wrinkled and her breath coming in sharp, desperate gasps. The panic had started during the board meeting, the one her father had insisted she attend to understand the family business, and now it consumed her like wildfire. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. "I can't breathe," she whispered to no one, her voice barely audible above the hum of the building's ventilation system. Her manicured fingers clawed at her throat, searching for air that seemed to have abandoned her completely. The city sprawled below, 40 stories down, but she felt as if she were falling through space with nothing to catch her. Marcus Chen had been mopping the same hallway for the past 3 years, every Tuesday and Friday evening after the executives had gone home to their mansions and country clubs. He was 34 years old with calloused hands that told stories of 16-hour days and shoulders that carried more weight than just the industrial cleaning supplies. His daughter Lily, 8 years old and wiser than her years, waited for him every night in the building's small employee break room, her homework spread across the plastic table while she hummed songs her mother used to sing. But tonight was different. Tonight, Marcus heard something that made him abandon his mop bucket and follow the sound down the polished corridor, the unmistakable sound of someone drowning on dry land. He found Emma pressed against the window, her silk blouse damp with perspiration, her eyes wide with terror. Marcus had seen this before, had lived through it himself during the darkest months after his wife Sarah's death, when the world felt too big and too small all at once. Without hesitation, he knelt beside her, his voice carrying the same gentle authority he used when Lily woke from nightmares. "Hey there," he said, his words soft as fallen snow. "I'm Marcus. I work here too. Can you look at me for just a second?" Emma's gaze darted toward him, wild and unfocused, but something in his tone, steady as a lighthouse beam, made her pause. He wasn't wearing a suit, he wasn't checking his watch or tapping his foot impatiently. He was just there, completely present, as if she were the most important person in the building. "That's good," Marcus continued, settling more comfortably on the cold marble. "Now I want you to tell me 5 things you can see right now. Just 5 simple things. Take your time." The technique had come from Dr. Patricia Valdez, the grief counselor who had helped Marcus navigate those first impossible months as a single father. Emma's breathing was still ragged, but she managed to whisper, The city lights, they're like tiny stars." "Beautiful," Marcus nodded. "That's one. What else?" Your name tag. It says Marcus Chen, maintenance." Her voice gained strength, curiosity flickering through the panic. "And there's a picture. Is that your daughter?" Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that reached deep into his eyes. "That's Lily. She's 8, and she's probably doing her math homework in the break room right now, wondering why I'm taking so long." He paused, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. "She has this theory that if she finishes all her homework before I'm done working, she'll grow up to be tall enough to ride every roller coaster at Six Flags." Despite everything, Emma felt her lips twitch upward. Does she know that homework doesn't affect height? "Don't tell her that," Marcus chuckled. "She's been eating extra vegetables and doing jumping jacks just in case. Some dreams are worth protecting." As Emma's breathing gradually slowed, Marcus continued the grounding exercise, guiding her through sounds, textures, and scents. The building's history unfolded around them, The late-night deals struck in these very halls, the dreams built and shattered, the weight of expectations that pressed down like gravity itself. Hartwell Industries had been Emma's grandfather's vision, built from a small accounting firm into a financial empire that employed 12,000 people across 6 states. Every decision made on this floor rippled outward, affecting families, communities, entire economic ecosystems. Emma had grown up in the shadow of this legacy, shuttled between boarding schools and summer programs, tutored in economics and international relations, groomed to inherit an empire she had never asked for. Her father, Richard Hartwell, loved her in the way that powerful men love their possessions, protectively, proudly, but without understanding the person beneath the potential. "My dad's going to be so angry," Emma whispered as her panic subsided into exhaustion. "I embarrassed him in front of the board. Mr. Thornton was talking about quarterly projections, and suddenly I just couldn't be there anymore." Marcus steadied her face, seeing not the heiress, but the scared teenager who had never learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness. "What made you feel trapped?" The question hung in the air like incense. Emma had never been asked what she felt, only what she thought, what she planned, what she would contribute to the family dynasty. They were talking about laying off 300 people in the Memphis division, just numbers on a spreadsheet. But I kept thinking about their families, their children. How do you just decide that from a conference room? You don't. Not easily, anyway. Good leaders lose sleep over decisions like that. But my father wasn't losing sleep. None of them were. They were planning their weekend golf games. Emma's voice cracked. How am I supposed to become like them? How am I supposed to care about profit margins more than people? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his janitorial uniform a sharp contrast to the executive opulence surrounding them. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of lived experience. Maybe the question isn't how to become like them. Maybe it's how to become the leader they need you to be. As Emma spoke, the doors at the end of the corridor opened, revealing Richard Hartwell, Emma's father, his 6-foot frame impeccably dressed even at 9 o'clock at night, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the stress lines creasing his forehead. Behind him walked Miss Patricia Morrison, his executive assistant for the past 15 years, her tablet clutched against her chest as she tried to keep pace with his urgent stride. "Emma," Richard's voice echoed through the corridor, a mixture of concern and barely contained frustration. "Security said you left the meeting. What are you doing on the floor?" Marcus rose smoothly, his movements respectful but not servile. He had cleaned these floors long enough to recognize the patterns of power, the invisible hierarchies that governed every interaction in this building. But he also recognized something else, a father's fear disguised as anger, the helplessness that came with loving someone you couldn't protect from themselves. "Mr. Hartwell," Marcus said, his voice steady, "your daughter had a panic attack. She's okay now, but she might need a moment to collect herself." Richard's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. His daughter sitting on the floor beside a janitor, her expensive clothes rumpled, her carefully applied makeup smeared. The image challenged everything he understood about propriety, about the invisible barriers that separated their worlds. "Emma, get up," he said, his voice sharp with embarrassment. "People will see you like this."
"Dad," Emma said, her voice small but determined. "This is Marcus. He helped me." Richard's gaze swept over Marcus, cataloging the uniform, the name tag, the calloused hands that spoke of manual labor. In that moment, Marcus saw himself reflected in the CEO's eyes, not as a person with his own struggles and victories, but as a problem to be managed, a witness to be contained. "I appreciate your assistance," Richard said, the words careful and cold. "But I can handle my daughter from here." Marcus nodded, understanding the dismissal for what it was, but something in Emma's expression made him pause. She looked up at him with desperate gratitude, as if he'd thrown her a lifeline in stormy seas. "Emma," Marcus said gently, "remember what we talked about. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear. It helps when the world feels too big." Richard's face flushed red, I don't think my daughter needs advice from someone who cares about her as a person instead of a business asset." Marcus's words were quiet, but they cut through the tension like a blade. The hallway fell silent, except for the distant hum of elevator motors and the soft whisper of air conditioning. Ms. Morrison stepped forward, her voice diplomatically neutral. "Mr. Hartwell, perhaps we should continue this conversation privately." But Emma stood up, her legs unsteady but her voice growing stronger. "Dad, he's right. When was the last time you asked me how I felt about anything? When was the last time you saw me panic and your first thought wasn't about how it would look to the board?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, each one finding its mark with surgical precision. Richard Hartwell had built an empire on his ability to read people, to anticipate their needs and desires, to manipulate situations to his advantage. But he had never learned to read his own daughter. As security guards appeared at the far end of the hallway, summoned by protocol rather than necessity, Marcus bent to retrieve his abandoned mop bucket. The moment had passed, the invisible barriers had reasserted themselves, and the natural order of things began to restore itself. But something had shifted in the gleaming marble hallway, something that would prove impossible to clean away. Emma watched Marcus gather his supplies, memorizing the careful way he moved, the dignity he maintained even in the face of her father's disdain. She wanted to say something more, to bridge the gap between their worlds, but the words stuck in her throat like expensive champagne that had turned bitter. "Thank you," she whispered, hoping he'd hear her over the sound of approaching footsteps and executive damage control. Marcus looked back once, his dark eyes meeting hers across the polished expanse of the corridor. In that glance, he conveyed everything he couldn't say aloud: that she mattered, that her feelings were valid, that the world didn't have to be the cold, calculating place her father's empire had trained her to expect. Then he was gone, disappearing around the corner with his mop bucket and his quiet dignity, leaving Emma alone with her father's expectations and the echo of a voice that had reminded her what it felt like to breathe. The remainder of that evening unfolded in a predictable pattern of corporate crisis management. Emma was escorted to her father's office, where she sat in the leather chair across from his massive desk while he paced behind floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city's glittering skyline. Ms. Morrison fielded calls from board members, her voice smooth as silk as she assured them that Miss Hartwell was simply overtired from her demanding academic schedule. But Emma was already planning her next move, something that would ensure this never happened to anyone else. 8-year-old Lily, doing homework in an employee break room, dreaming of roller coasters and believing that extra vegetables might help her grow taller. The image felt more real, more meaningful than all the quarterly reports and strategic projections that filled her father's world.
As the clock struck 10 and the building's executive floors finally fell quiet, Emma made a decision that would change everything. She would find Marcus again. She would learn his story, understand the source of that unshakable calm, and perhaps discover a different way to be strong, one that didn't require her to sacrifice her heart on the altar of profit margins. The city lights twinkled below like earthbound stars, and for the first time in months, Emma felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Marcus Chen's morning began at 4:30 a.m., not with an alarm clock, but with the soft sound of Lily talking in her sleep. She had inherited her mother's habit of conducting entire conversations with her dreams, and this morning she was apparently explaining fractions to an imaginary classmate who couldn't understand why 2/4 equaled 1/2. Marcus lay still for a moment, listening to her patient, sleepy voice through the thin apartment wall, and felt his heart squeeze with the familiar mixture of love and worry that had become his constant companion. Their apartment occupied the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone in Queens, 45 minutes by subway from the gleaming towers of Manhattan, where Marcus spent his evenings mopping floors that cost more per square foot than he made in a month. The rent was reasonable, because Mrs. Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, had taken pity on a widowed father trying to rebuild his life from scratch. She lived on the first floor and served as Lily's unofficial grandmother, accepting leftover casseroles and helping with homework in exchange for Marcus's expertise with leaky pipes and squeaky hinges. The routine was sacred, unchanged for 3 years. Marcus would shower quickly, brew coffee strong enough to power a small truck, and prepare Lily's breakfast while she dressed herself with the fierce independence of a child who had learned too young that sometimes adults couldn't be counted on to always be there. By 6:15, they would walk hand in hand to PS 157, where Lily would kiss his cheek and skip toward the building with the confidence of someone who believed the world was fundamentally good. Then Marcus would catch the 6:45 train into Manhattan, where he worked his first job at a small electronics repair shop in Chinatown. Jin Watanabe, the elderly owner, had hired Marcus during his darkest period, when grief had made him unreliable and desperate. Jin never asked questions about the days Marcus arrived with red-rimmed eyes or the phone calls from doctors' offices and funeral directors. He simply handed Marcus broken radios and smartphones, trusting him to make them work again. The repair shop was a sanctuary of quiet concentration, where Marcus's engineering degree, earned night school after night school while Sarah waited tables and dreamed of the life they would build together, finally found purpose again. His hands, scarred from 3 years of janitorial work, moved with surprising gentleness as he coaxed knife back into discarded electronics. Each successful repair felt like a small victory against entropy, against the forces that broke things apart and left them scattered. "Marcus, son," Jin would say during their shared lunch breaks, "you have good hands, healing hands. Maybe you fix more than machines, yes?" Marcus never knew how to answer such observations. He had always been a practical man, focused on problems that could be solved with the right tools and enough patience. But since Sarah's death, the world had become a more complex place, full of breakdowns that couldn't be fixed with solder and circuit boards. At 2:30 p.m., Marcus would catch another train to his second job at Hartwell Industries, where he worked until midnight cleaning offices that still smelled of expensive cologne and boardroom anxiety. The transition between worlds was jarring, from the humble repair shop where broken things found new life to the corporate tower where broken people ground themselves against the machinery of capitalism without ever acknowledging the damage. But Marcus had learned to find meaning in the contrast. In the repair shop, he worked with his hands and his mind, solving puzzles and creating small miracles. At Hartwell Industries, he worked with his heart, maintaining spaces where other people pursued their dreams and ambitions. Both jobs required attention to detail, patience, and the ability to see potential where others saw only problems.
The other janitors at Hartwell Industries were a rotating cast of night shift workers, each carrying their own stories of struggle and resilience. There was Rosa Martinez, a grandmother of 7 who sent half her paycheck to family in El Salvador and still managed to maintain the sunny disposition that made executives smile when they worked late. Carlos Rodriguez had been an accountant in Venezuela before political upheaval forced him to flee with nothing but his family and his determination to rebuild. Maria Santos was studying nursing at a community college, her textbooks tucked beside her cleaning supplies as she memorized anatomy between conference rooms. They formed an invisible community within the building's marble walls, sharing stories during break times and covering for each other when life inevitably interfered with work schedules. Marcus had become their unofficial leader, not through ambition but through reliability. He was the one who could fix a broken vacuum cleaner, translate complicated scheduling changes, or listen without judgment when someone needed to vent their frustrations. But for all the friendships he had built, Marcus remained careful about revealing too much of himself. His colleagues knew about Lily, of course. Her photograph was prominently displayed in his locker, and her artwork covered the break room bulletin board like cheerful graffiti. But they didn't know about his engineering degree, about the life he had planned before Sarah's illness changed everything, about the nights when he lay awake, calculating how many years it would take to save enough money for Lily's college education. The morning after his encounter with Emma Hartwell, Marcus found himself distracted during his shift at the repair shop. Jin noticed immediately.
his weathered face creasing with concern as he watched Marcus fumble with a simple capacitor replacement that should have taken 5 minutes. "Something different today," Jin observed, his accented English careful and precise. "You helped someone last night, yes? I see it in your hands. They move like someone who carry new weight." Marcus looked up from the radio he had been pretending to fix. Jin had an uncanny ability to read people's emotional states through their work habits, a skill developed over 60 years of watching customers struggle with broken possessions that often represented broken dreams. There was a girl, young woman really, having a panic attack in the office building where I work. She was lost. "Ah," Jin nodded sagely. "Rich girl with poor soul, yes? I see this many times. Money cannot buy peace of mind. She's the CEO's daughter, heir to the whole empire. But she looked so fragile, like she was drowning in expectations." Jin set down his soldering iron and turned to face Marcus fully, his brown eyes serious. "My grandfather tell me story from old country about emperor's son who cry every night because he know he must become emperor. All power, no choice. Very sad story." "What happened to the emperor's son?" "He become emperor," Jin said with a slight smile. "But first, he learned that power is not about what you take, is about what you give." The conversation stayed with Marcus throughout the day, echoing through his thoughts as he picked up Lily from school and listened to her excited recounting of a science experiment involving vinegar and baking soda. His teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, had praised Lily's hypothesis about chemical reactions, and she bounced on her toes as she described the volcano they had created. "Dad, did you know that when two different things mix together, they can make something completely new?" Lily asked as they walked home through the bustling Queens neighborhood where children played in small parks and grandmothers watched from stoops, their conversations creating a multilingual symphony. "I did know that," Marcus replied, thinking about his encounter with Emma and the unexpected chemistry of their interaction. "It's called a reaction. Sometimes mixing different elements creates something beautiful."
Or sometimes it explodes, Lily added with 8-year-old pragmatism. "Miss Rodriguez said we have to be careful about what we mix together." That evening, as Marcus prepared for his shift at Hartwell Industries, he found himself wondering about Emma's day. Had she returned to school? Had her father subjected her to corporate therapy sessions or image management consultations? The questions surprised him with their intensity. He had been trained by 3 years of grief to keep his emotional investments small and manageable. But something about Emma's vulnerability had pierced through his careful defenses. Perhaps it was recognition, the understanding that comes from meeting someone who is struggling to breathe in a world that demands perfect composure. Or perhaps it was simpler than that, the basic human instinct to help someone who is drowning, regardless of the social distance between you. When Marcus arrived at Hartwell Industries that evening, the building felt different. The marble lobbies and executive corridors carried an electric tension, as if the very air molecules were vibrating with corporate drama. Marcus had learned to read the building's moods through small details: the number of cars in the executive parking garage, the volume of conversation in conference rooms, the way security guards held themselves when they thought no one was watching. Tonight, the building hummed with damage control energy. Additional security personnel stood at strategic locations, their earpieces crackling with communications. Miss Morrison moved through the halls like a general coordinating a military campaign, her usual calm professionalism sharpened to surgical precision. Rosa Martinez found Marcus during their break time, her eyes bright with gossip and concern. "Did you hear about last night? The CEO's daughter had some kind of breakdown during a board meeting. Security had to search the building for her." "Really?" Marcus kept his voice carefully neutral. "Carlos was here late doing the conference rooms. He said there were executives making phone calls until almost 11 o'clock, something about crisis management and media control." Rosa lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I feel bad for that girl. Can you imagine growing up with all that pressure? Money doesn't buy happiness, you know." Marcus nodded, thinking about Emma's desperate questions about profit margins and people's lives. What happened to her? Is she okay? Nobody knows for sure. The executives don't talk about personal stuff in front of us. We're invisible to them, you know? But Maria heard Miss Morrison on the phone this morning, something about private counseling and family therapy. Rosa shook her head sadly. That poor child probably never had a normal childhood. The conversation reinforced Marcus's growing sense that his encounter with Emma had been more significant than a simple panic attack intervention. In the rarefied world of corporate dynasties, even emotional breakdowns became public relations challenges to be managed and contained. As Marcus moved through his cleaning routine that night, he found himself paying closer attention to the spaces Emma would inhabit: her father's office, the conference rooms where she would learn to make decisions that affected thousands of lives, the corridors where she would walk, carrying the weight of inherited expectations. The building began to feel less like a workplace and more like a prison designed to contain dreams and remake them into quarterly projections. Near midnight, as Marcus was finishing the executive floors, he discovered something that made his heart race. Emma's school blazer hung on the back of a chair in one of the smaller conference rooms, apparently forgotten during the previous evening's crisis. The fabric was expensive, custom-tailored, embroidered with the crest of an exclusive private academy, but what caught Marcus's attention wasn't the blazer itself, it was what had fallen from one of its pockets. A small piece of paper, folded multiple times, covered with handwriting in blue ink. He knew he shouldn't read it, knew that personal correspondence was sacred territory, regardless of social hierarchies. But something about the way the paper had been folded, carefully, protectively, suggested it contained something important. Against his better judgment, Marcus unfolded the paper. What he found was a poem written in Emma's careful cursive. The numbers dance on polished screens. Each digit weighs 1,000 dreams. I sit in rooms where futures sell and wonder who will break the spell. They speak of growth and market share, while families disappear from there. I wear their suits and learn their speech, but can't forget the ones they reach. Is leadership just learned coldness? Must power cost me human wholeness? I search for ways to be both strong and prove that caring isn't wrong. Marcus read the poem 3 times, his cleaning supplies forgotten as he absorbed the raw honesty of Emma's words. The girl who had panicked in the hallway wasn't just struggling with anxiety. She was wrestling with fundamental questions about identity, morality, and the price of inheriting power. He refolded the paper carefully and placed it back with the blazer, but the words continued to echo through his mind as he finished his shift. Emma's poem revealed a depth of thought and feeling that corporate training programs couldn't address, questions that boardroom strategies couldn't answer. As Marcus rode the late train back to Queens, watching the city lights blur past the windows, he made a decision that surprised him. Tomorrow evening, he would find a way to return Emma's blazer personally, not to overstep boundaries or force an inappropriate friendship, but to let her know that someone had witnessed her struggle and understood its significance. The decision felt risky, potentially foolish, but Marcus had learned from Jean Watanabe that some repairs required more than technical expertise. They required human connection, the willingness to reach across divides and offer understanding where others saw only problems to be fixed. By the time Marcus reached his apartment, Lily was fast asleep, her homework neatly completed on the kitchen table, alongside a drawing she had made of a volcano erupting in rainbow colors. Marcus tucked her in gently, kissing her forehead and whispering the same words he had spoken every night since Sarah's death. "Sweet dreams, little scientist. Tomorrow is full of possibilities." But as he lay in his own bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of the neighborhood settling into sleep, Marcus found himself thinking not about tomorrow's possibilities, but about tonight's unexpected discovery. Emma's poem had revealed someone trapped between worlds, searching for a way to honor both her inheritance and her conscience. Perhaps Jin was right about mixing different elements. Perhaps some reactions, carefully managed, could create something beautiful instead of explosive. Marcus fell asleep wondering what might happen if a janitor and a CEO's daughter decided to prove that caring wasn't wrong, that power didn't have to cost wholeness, and that sometimes the most important repairs happened not to machines but to the human heart.
Marcus! Emma's voice carried a warmth that seemed to illuminate the dreary cafeteria. I was hoping I'd see you again. I wanted to thank you properly for the other night. How are you feeling? Marcus asked, settling carefully into the plastic chair across from her. The furniture protested under his weight, reminding both of them that this space wasn't designed for extended conversations. Better? Different, actually. Emma closed her laptop and leaned forward, her blue eyes intense with the kind of focus that probably made board members nervous. That technique you taught me, the grounding thing, it works. I've been using it all week. Marcus smiled. Dr. Valdez would be pleased to hear that. She's the grief counselor who taught it to me after my wife died. The words hung in the air like a confession. Emma's expression softened, and Marcus realized he had revealed more about himself in one sentence than he had shared with most of his colleagues in 3 years. But something about Emma's presence made vulnerability feel safe rather than dangerous. I'm sorry for your loss, Emma said, and the phrase carried genuine weight rather than reflexive politeness. Is that why you know so much about panic attacks? Because of grief? Marcus nodded, surprised by his willingness to continue. Grief can feel a lot like drowning. The world becomes too big and too small at the same time. You forget how to breathe normally. Yes, Emma leaned forward eagerly. That's exactly it, like you're suffocating in open air. She paused, studying his face. But you learned to manage it. How? The question opened doorways Marcus had kept carefully locked. Over the next hour, as the cafeteria gradually emptied and the building settled into its nighttime rhythms, he found himself telling Emma about Sarah's 2-year battle with cancer, about learning to be a single father while navigating his own grief, about the way panic attacks had ambushed him in grocery stores and parent-teacher conferences until Dr. Valdez taught him to ground himself in present-moment sensations. Emma listened with the intensity of someone gathering intelligence for survival. She asked thoughtful questions about coping strategies, about maintaining hope when the future felt uncertain, about finding meaning in small daily victories. Her attention was complete and non-judgmental, creating a space where Marcus could acknowledge vulnerabilities he rarely discussed even with close friends. Your daughter, Lily, she must be incredibly strong to have handled losing her mother so young. She's remarkable, Marcus agreed, his voice thick with pride. Sometimes I think she's taking care of me more than I'm taking care of her. She has this way of finding joy in the smallest things, a perfect leaf, a funny cloud formation, the way light hits a puddle. She keeps me anchored to what's actually important. I envy that, Emma said quietly. I've never learned how to find joy in small things. Everything in my life is about big things, big decisions, big consequences, big expectations. Sometimes I wonder if I've missed the parts that make life worth living. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of building security. 2 guards in identical uniforms, their faces professionally neutral as they approached the table. Marcus felt his stomach tighten, recognizing the careful choreography of corporate damage control. Ms. Hartwell, the senior guard said, respectfully firm, your father asked us to locate you. He's concerned about your whereabouts. Emma's face flushed with embarrassment and frustration.
I told Miss Morrison I'd be in the building. I'm perfectly safe. Of course, miss. But perhaps it would be better to continue your studies in your father's office, where the lighting is more appropriate for reading.
The subtext was clear. Your father doesn't want you socializing with the help. Marcus began to stand, ready to diffuse the situation by removing himself from the equation, but Emma's hand briefly touched his arm. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying a note of authority that Marcus hadn't heard before, "Marcus and I were discussing grief counseling techniques for my psychology class at school. It's been very educational." The lie was smooth and believable, transforming their personal conversation into an academic exercise. Marcus admired the quick thinking, even as he recognized the sadness behind it. Emma had learned to navigate around her father's expectations with the skill of someone who had been doing it for years. "I see," the guard said, though his expression suggested he didn't entirely believe the explanation. "Would you like us to escort you to a more comfortable location for your interview?" "That's not necessary," Emma replied. "We're almost finished here." After the security guards retreated to a respectful distance, Emma turned to Marcus with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about that. My father worries when he can't track my exact location at all times." "It's understandable," Marcus said diplomatically, though privately he wondered what kind of childhood had required such intensive monitoring. "Your safety is important to him." "My safety, my reputation, my future value to the company," Emma said with bitter accuracy. "Sometimes I think he sees me as an investment that requires protection rather than a daughter who needs freedom to grow." The conversation might have continued, but Marcus noticed Miss Morrison approaching with the determined stride of someone on a corporate mission. Her usually immaculate appearance showed signs of stress, a slight wrinkle in her blazer, a strand of gray hair that had escaped from her perfect chignon. "Emma, darling," Miss Morrison said, her voice carrying a maternal warmth layered over professional urgency. "Your father is expecting you in his office. There's been a development with the Times article." Emma's face went pale. "What Times article?" Miss Morrison's eyes flicked toward Marcus, and he read the message clearly. This conversation required privacy. He stood smoothly, gathering his cleaning supplies with practiced efficiency. "I should get back to work," Marcus said. "Thank you for the conversation, Miss Hartwell. I hope your psychology project goes well." As he moved toward the exit, Marcus heard Emma call out, "Wait!" He turned back to see her hurrying after him, something clutched in her hand. "You forgot to return this," she said, holding out a business card with her personal email address written on the back. "In case you have any other insights about grief counseling that might help with my research." Marcus accepted the card, understanding the real message. Emma Hartwell, heiress, future CEO, product of privilege and private schools, had just asked a janitor to stay in touch. The request challenged every assumption about social hierarchies and appropriate boundaries that governed life in corporate America. The rest of Marcus's shift passed in a blur of routine tasks complicated by extraordinary thoughts. He mopped floors while contemplating the loneliness he had seen in Emma's eyes, the way she had apologized for her father's security protocols, as if wealth were something shameful rather than protective. The business card in his pocket seemed to pulse with possibility and danger in equal measure. Around 11 p.m., as Marcus was cleaning the executive conference rooms, he encountered Richard Hartwell himself. The CEO stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the corner office, his silhouette sharp against the city lights, his phone pressed to his ear as he conducted what sounded like damage control with the public relations firm. "I don't care what it costs," Richard's voice carried clearly through the open door. "Kill the story."
Emma is 17 years old and off-limits to media speculation. If anyone tries to run photos from the other night, I want them buried so deep they'll need archaeological equipment to find them. Marcus continued his work quietly, trained by years of night shift invisibility to move through executive spaces without drawing attention. But as he emptied the trash bin near Richard's desk, he couldn't help overhearing the conversation's evolution. "What do you mean there are witnesses? Who saw what exactly?" Richard's voice sharpened with the kind of focus that had built empires and destroyed competitors. "A janitor? Jesus Christ, Patricia, tell me you're kidding." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. He had become a loose end in Richard Hartwell's crisis management strategy, a potential threat to the carefully constructed narrative surrounding Emma's panic attack. The realization that his simple act of kindness had political implications made him question everything about the interaction. Find out everything about this janitor: employment history, family situation, financial vulnerabilities. I want options for ensuring his discretion. The phrase, ensuring his discretion, carried ominous undertones that made Marcus's hands shake as he continued collecting trash. He had worked in corporate environments long enough to understand euphemisms, to recognize when powerful people discussed solving problems that involved inconvenient human beings. Marcus finished his tasks with mechanical precision, his mind racing through implications and potential consequences. By associating with Emma, he had inadvertently painted a target on himself and, by extension, on Lily. The business card in his pocket now felt less like an invitation and more like evidence of inappropriate boundary crossing. The next morning brought confirmation of Marcus's fears in an unexpected form. As Marcus arrived for his shift at Jin's electronics repair shop, he found two men in expensive suits waiting outside the storefront. Their presence had the calculated casualness of professional investigators, too well-dressed for the neighborhood, too interested in their surroundings to be genuine customers. Marcus Chen, the taller man, stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're from Hartwell Industries' Human Resources Department. We'd like a moment of your time." Jin emerged from the shop, his weathered face creasing with concern as he took in the scene. "Shop is closed to suits," he announced in deliberately broken English, though Marcus knew his boss spoke perfectly fluent conversation when it served his purposes. "Marcus-san is busy with important work." "This will only take a moment," the second man said, producing a business card with corporate letterhead. "We're conducting a routine review of all employees who had contact with Miss Hartwell during her recent health episode." The euphemism confirmed Marcus's suspicions about the visit's true purpose. These weren't HR representatives conducting routine reviews. They were corporate fixers sent to assess and neutralize potential threats to the Hartwell family's reputation. "I helped a young woman who was having a panic attack. I used basic first aid techniques that anyone could have applied. There's nothing to review." "Of course not," the taller man agreed smoothly. "Mr. Hartwell simply wants to express his gratitude for your assistance. In fact, he's prepared to offer you a substantial bonus as a token of appreciation for your discretion regarding the incident."
The offer hung in the air like bait on a hook. Marcus could see the calculation behind it. A payment large enough to seem generous, contingent on silence that would prevent any media exploitation of Emma's vulnerable moment. It was the kind of elegant solution that powerful people use to transform potential problems into manageable assets. "How substantial?" Marcus asked, not because he intended to accept, but because he wanted to understand the perceived magnitude of his threat to their narrative. $25,000, the second man said, tax-free with a simple confidentiality agreement to ensure Miss Hartwell's privacy is protected. The amount was staggering, more than Marcus made in 6 months of combined income from both jobs. It represented Lily's college fund, medical security, the possibility of reducing his crushing work schedule to spend more time with his daughter. The temptation was real and immediate.
But something about the offer felt poisonous, a corruption of the genuine human connection he had formed with Emma. Accepting payment for his silence would transform his act of compassion into a transaction, reducing Emma's moment of vulnerability to a commodity that could be bought and controlled. "I appreciate Mr. Hartwell's gratitude," Marcus said finally, "but I don't need payment for helping someone who was suffering. It was the human thing to do." The two men exchanged glances that contained entire conversations about stubborn employees and alternative persuasion methods. The taller man's smile became more forced, his tone carrying subtle undertones of threat. "Mr. Chen, I think you may not fully understand the complexity of Miss Hartwell's situation. There are media outlets that would pay handsomely for inside information about the family's private moments. By refusing Mr. Hartwell's generous offer, you might inadvertently create the impression that you're seeking alternative forms of compensation." The implication was clear. Refuse their money, and they would position him as a potential blackmailer or media source. Marcus felt the familiar weight of systemic inequality, the way wealth and power could reshape narratives, transform victims into villains, and make simple human decency appear suspicious. Jin stepped forward, his presence small but surprisingly commanding. "You leave now," he said, abandoning his broken English act entirely. "This is private business, not corporate playground. Marcus-san owes you nothing but the work you pay him for." "This doesn't concern you, sir," the second man said dismissively. "Everything concerning Marcus-san concerns me. He is good man with good heart. You want to buy his silence about helping sick girl? Shame on you. Shame on your company." The confrontation attracted attention from neighboring shopkeepers and morning commuters. Marcus realized that the corporate fixers had underestimated the tight-knit nature of the neighborhood community, the way small business owners looked out for each other against external threats. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Chen," the taller man said as they retreated toward their waiting car. "Mr. Hartwell hopes you'll reconsider his offer before making any unfortunate decisions about media contact." As the black sedan disappeared into morning traffic, Marcus felt the full weight of his situation settle over him like a lead blanket. By showing kindness to Emma, he had entangled himself in the complex web of corporate politics and family reputation management. His simple act of human decency had been transformed into a potential weapon that could be used against the very person he had tried to help.
"You did right thing," Jin said firmly as they entered the shop. "Money with strings attached is not money, is trap. Rich people think they can buy souls like they buy objects." But Marcus spent the day wrestling with doubt and practical concerns. $25,000 represented more than personal comfort. It was security for Lily's future, protection against medical emergencies, the possibility of educational opportunities that could transform their lives. By refusing the offer, was he being principled or simply stubborn? Was he putting ideology above his daughter's welfare? The questions followed him through his afternoon shift, complicated by an email that appeared on his phone during his lunch break. The message came from Emma's personal address, brief but loaded with meaning. "Marcus, I heard about the visit from HR. I'm sorry my father is treating you like a problem to be solved instead of a person who helped me. If you need anything, please let me know. Your friend, Emma." The email confirmed Marcus's suspicions about the true nature of the morning's corporate visit, while revealing that Emma possessed her own intelligence network within the company's power structure. Her apology carried the weight of someone who understood how wealth and influence could crush ordinary people who had the misfortune to intersect with family crises. More troubling was her use of the word friend, a designation that could be interpreted as innocent gratitude or inappropriate boundary crossing, depending on who was doing the interpreting. Marcus realized that Emma might not fully understand the dangerous game she was playing, the way her gesture of friendship could be weaponized against both of them. That evening, as Marcus prepared for his shift at Hartwell Industries, he made a decision that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. He would maintain professional distance from Emma, avoiding any interaction that could be misconstrued as manipulation or opportunism. The friendship that had begun with a panic attack and a grounding exercise would have to end before it destroyed them both. The decision felt like swallowing broken glass, but Marcus had learned that sometimes protecting someone you cared about required sacrificing the relationship itself. Emma deserved better than the complications his presence brought to her already challenging life. But as Marcus entered the gleaming lobby of Hartwell Industries that night, he had no way of knowing that Emma had reached a very different conclusion about their situation. While he was deciding to step back for her protection, she was planning something that would bring their worlds into even more dramatic collision. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything both of them believed about courage, loyalty, and the true cost of standing up for what was right in a world designed to punish such impulses. Marcus began his cleaning routine with mechanical precision, unaware that Emma was 3 floors above, drafting an email that would change both their lives forever. The building hummed around them with the energy of impending transformation, as if the marble walls and steel beams understood that sometimes the most important repairs happen not to infrastructure, but to the human systems that gave architecture its meaning. In her father's office, Emma typed and deleted and retyped words that felt simultaneously too bold and not bold enough. She was trying to articulate something that corporate training had never taught her: how to use inherited power not as a weapon of control, but as a tool for justice. The email in her draft folder would either free them both or destroy them together. But she was finally ready to discover which outcome would emerge from the collision of her conscience with her father's empire. Emma's email arrived in Marcus's inbox at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, 40 minutes before his shift would end, and 12 hours after she had watched from her father's office window as corporate security escorted him to a meeting he hadn't requested. The subject line read, simply, "Emergency. Please read immediately." Marcus opened the message while hiding in the supply closet on the 48th floor, his heart pounding as he read words that would either save them both or condemn them to corporate exile. "Marcus, my father is planning to fire you tomorrow morning. Worse, he's going to claim you attempted to extort money from our family using information about my panic attack. He has
Lawyers drafting documents that will make it impossible for you to work in any major building in Manhattan. I can't let this happen to someone whose only crime was showing me kindness. Meet me in conference room C at midnight. I have a plan. Emma." The message hit Marcus like physical blow, confirming his worst fears about the consequences of compassion in a world governed by quarterly profits and reputation management. He read it 3 times, each iteration revealing new layers of corporate cruelty, the careful construction of false charges, the systematic destruction of his ability to earn a living, the weaponization of his own good deed against him. But Emma's claim to have a plan intrigued and terrified him in equal measure. What could a 17-year-old, however privileged and intelligent, do against the full weight of corporate legal machinery? How could she protect him without destroying herself in the process? Marcus made his way to conference room C with the quiet desperation of someone who had run out of safe choices. The room was small and sterile, designed for middle management meetings rather than executive strategy sessions. Emma sat at the oval table, her laptop open, documents spread across the polished surface like battle plans. She looked up as he entered, her blue eyes bright with determination and something that might have been reckless courage. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Your father is going to destroy me. Why are you willing to risk yourself to stop him?" Emma's expression grew serious, aged beyond her 17 years by the weight of inherited moral responsibility. "Because what he's doing is wrong. Because you helped me when I was drowning, and I won't let him punish you for basic human decency. And because—" She paused, searching for words. "Because I'm tired of being complicit in a system that treats people as disposable assets." She turned her laptop screen towards him, revealing an email draft addressed to the New York Times business reporter who had been investigating workplace conditions in major Manhattan office buildings. The message was detailed, specific,
and devastating. Miss Rodriguez, I am Emma Hartwell, daughter of Hartwell Industries CEO Richard Hartwell. I am writing to inform you about my father's systematic intimidation of employees who have witnessed my family's private moments. Specifically, he is planning to falsely accuse Marcus Chen, a night shift janitor who provided medical assistance during my panic attack, of attempted extortion. Mr. Chen's only crime was helping me when I was having a mental health crisis. My father's actions represent the worst kind of corporate abuse, using wealth and legal power to destroy an innocent person who cannot afford to defend themselves. Marcus felt his breathing become shallow as he absorbed the implications of Emma's plan. She was prepared to publicly challenge her father's narrative, exposing both her own vulnerability and the family's vindictive response to protect him. The letter would indeed stop Richard Hartwell's campaign against Marcus, but at the cost of Emma's relationship with her father and possibly her inheritance. "You can't send this," Marcus said firmly. "It would destroy your family, your future." "My family is already broken," Emma replied with startling clarity. "A father who would ruin an innocent person to protect his daughter's image isn't someone I want to become. As for my future, maybe I need to build one that isn't founded on other people's suffering." The conversation was interrupted by the soft chime of the elevator arriving on their floor. Both Emma and Marcus froze, recognizing the dangerous implications of being discovered together at midnight in a conference room, especially given the accusations Richard Hartwell was preparing to level against Marcus. "Storage closet," Emma whispered urgently, gathering her documents with practiced efficiency. "If someone finds me here alone, I can claim I was working on college applications." They slipped into the adjacent supply closet, just as footsteps echoed through the corridor. Through the thin door, they could hear the familiar voice of Miss Morrison conducting what sounded like a security sweep with building personnel. "Check all the conference rooms on floors 45 through 52. Mr. Hartwell received a report that his daughter was seen in the building after hours. We need to locate her immediately."
The supply closet was cramped and dark, forcing Marcus and Emma into uncomfortable proximity. They could hear security guards moving through the adjacent rooms, their radios crackling with status updates. Emma's breathing was carefully controlled, but Marcus could sense her anxiety in the tension of her shoulders, the way her hands clenched and unclenched in the darkness. "I'm sorry," she whispered, so quietly that her words barely registered above the sound of their combined breathing. "I never wanted to drag you into this mess." "You didn't drag me anywhere," Marcus replied with equal quietness. "I chose to help you. I'd make the same choice again." They remained silent as the security sweep continued, listening to the methodical search of nearby offices and conference rooms. After 20 minutes that felt like hours, the sounds receded as the security team moved to other floors. When they finally emerged from the closet, Emma's determination had crystallized into something approaching fierce resolve. She returned to her laptop and began making final edits to the email that would change both their lives. "There has to be another way," Marcus said desperately. "Something that doesn't require you to sacrifice your relationship with your father." Emma looked up from her typing, her expression sad but determined. "Marcus, my father sees you as a problem to be eliminated. He doesn't care about your daughter, your jobs, your ability to survive. He cares about controlling the narrative around his family's image. The only way to stop him is to make the cost of attacking you greater than the benefit of protecting his reputation." As she spoke, Emma's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. Her face went pale as she read it, and she wordlessly handed the device to Marcus. The message was from Miss Morrison. "Emma, your father knows you're in the building. Security is conducting a full sweep. If you're trying to contact the janitor who was present during your episode, please remember that such contact could be misinterpreted as collusion in potential legal proceedings. Return to his office immediately." The text confirmed their worst fears. Richard Hartwell wasn't just planning to destroy Marcus professionally. He was building a legal case that would frame any contact between Emma and Marcus as evidence of a conspiracy to extort money from the family. "He's backing us into a corner," Marcus said, his voice hollow with realization. "Any relationship between us becomes evidence of wrongdoing. Even this conversation could be twisted into proof that we're plotting together. Emma's fingers moved across her laptop keyboard with increasing urgency, finalizing the email that would serve as their only protection against her father's legal machinery. Then we need to get our story out before he can control the narrative. But before she could hit send, the conference room door opened with the quiet authority of expensive shoes on marble floors. Richard Hartwell entered flanked by 2 security guards and a man Marcus didn't recognize, clearly a lawyer, judging by his expensive suit and the briefcase clutched in his manicured hands. "Emma." Richard's voice carried disappointment so profound it seemed to physically press down on everyone in the room. "What exactly do you think you're accomplishing here?" Emma closed her laptop with deliberate calm, her movements controlled despite the obvious tension radiating through her body. "I'm trying to prevent you from destroying an innocent person, Dad." "Innocent?" Richard's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Emma, this man has been cultivating a relationship with you for weeks. He refused a generous settlement offer, then arranged a private meeting with you at midnight in a secluded location. How exactly does that qualify as innocent behavior?"
The accusation hung in the air like poison gas, transforming Marcus's every gesture of kindness into evidence of manipulation. He could see how easily Richard's narrative would convince a jury. The predatory janitor grooming the vulnerable heiress, exploiting her mental health crisis for financial gain? "That's not what happened," Emma said firmly. "Marcus helped me during a panic attack. Everything since then has been my initiative, my choice to maintain contact." "Contact that he encouraged," the lawyer interjected smoothly. "Contact that culminated in a clandestine midnight meeting where he could pressure you away from family support systems." Marcus felt the walls closing in around him, the inexorable logic of corporate legal strategy transforming his reality into something unrecognizable. He had entered this building as a simple janitor trying to help a suffering teenager. He would leave as a predator who had manipulated family tragedy for personal gain. "None of this is true," Marcus said, though he could hear the futility in his own voice. "I never asked Emma for anything. I never pressured her to maintain contact." "Then why are you here?" demanded Richard. "Why did you arrange a private meeting with my daughter at midnight in an empty building?" Before Marcus could respond, Emma stood up with the kind of authority that seemed to run in her bloodline. "Because I asked him to come, because I needed to warn him about your plan to destroy his life, because someone had to stand up for basic human decency." The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 48 floors below. Richard stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time, recognizing something in her expression that challenged his fundamental assumptions about family loyalty and corporate strategy. "Emma," he said slowly, "you don't understand the complexities of what you're involving yourself in. This man could destroy our family's reputation. He could use your vulnerability against us in ways you can't imagine." "He already had the opportunity to do that," Emma replied. "When your security team offered him $25,000 for his silence, he refused. When journalists started sniffing around the story, he could have sold his account for much more. Instead, he's been protecting my privacy while you've been planning to destroy his life." Richard's face flushed red as he realized Emma had been monitoring his damage control efforts, understanding the true nature of his response to her panic attack. The revelation that his own daughter had been documenting his vindictive behavior seemed to shake his confidence in his narrative. "You offered him money?" Emma continued, her voice gaining strength. "You tried to buy his silence, and when he refused, you decided to frame him as a criminal? What does that make you, Dad?" The question echoed through the conference room like a physical blow. Marcus watched Richard Hartwell, titan of industry, builder of financial empires, struggle to answer his teenage daughter's challenge to his moral authority. "I was protecting you," Richard said finally, his voice defensive, "protecting our family from exploitation by people who would use your moment of weakness against us." "No," Emma said with devastating clarity. "You were protecting your image, your reputation, your ability to control the narrative about our family's perfect facade." She looked directly at her father, and Marcus could see the moment when years of accumulated disappointment crystallized into active resistance. "But I'm not perfect, Dad. I have panic attacks. I struggle with the pressure you've put on me. And I found more genuine care from a janitor than I've received from my own father in years." The accusation struck Richard like a physical blow, revealing the emotional void at the center of their relationship. Marcus realized he was witnessing the collapse of a family dynamic built on performance rather than authentic connection.
Richard turned to Marcus with eyes that blazed with frustrated fury. "You have no idea what you've done to my family." "He saved your daughter from drowning in expectations," Emma interjected before Marcus could respond. "He treated her like a human being instead of a corporate asset. Maybe you should be thanking him instead of trying to destroy him." "Choose, Dad," Emma said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Destroy Marcus and lose your daughter's respect forever, or prove that our family stands for something more than protecting our image." The silence stretched until Richard's shoulders sagged in defeat. He had built an empire, but his 17-year-old daughter had just taught him what real power looked like. And security guards positioning themselves strategically around the room, but Marcus could see that something fundamental had shifted in the power dynamic. Emma's willingness to publicly defend him had transformed the situation from a simple case of corporate damage control into a family civil war with much higher stakes. Finally, Richard's lawyer leaned forward and whispered something urgent in his employer's ear. Richard's expression shifted from anger to calculation, the look of someone recognizing that his original strategy had become counterproductive. "Emma," Richard said carefully, "what would it take for you to reconsider your public statement about this situation?" Emma looked at her father with something approaching pity. "It would take you treating Marcus with the respect he deserves. It would take you acknowledging that he helped me when I needed it most. And it would take you stopping this vindictive campaign to destroy his life." "And in return?" "In return, I'll keep our family's private business private, but I won't let you turn kindness into a crime, and I won't let you destroy someone whose only mistake was caring about your daughter's well-being." Marcus watched this negotiation with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. Emma was using her inheritance as leverage, her position as heir to the Hartwell empire as protection for someone who had no power or influence. She was transforming family loyalty from a tool of control into a weapon of justice. Richard studied his daughter's face for a long moment, seeming to recognize something that surprised him. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different tone, still frustrated, but touched with what might have been respect. "You are more like your mother than I realized. She had the same stubborn sense of justice, the same willingness to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves." Emma's expression softened slightly. "Then you understand why I can't let this happen." The standoff ended when Richard realized his daughter had grown into someone he barely recognized, someone willing to sacrifice everything for a principle. "You are more like your mother than I thought. She would have done the same thing." Within an hour, the lawyers had drafted an agreement. Marcus would keep his job and face no legal consequences for his interaction with Emma. The corporate investigation into his background would be quietly discontinued. In exchange, both Marcus and Emma would maintain confidentiality about the family's private crisis and the subsequent damage control efforts. It wasn't a perfect solution. It left the power imbalances intact and didn't address the systemic issues that had created the crisis in the first place, but it represented something unprecedented in Marcus's experience: the use of wealth and privilege to protect rather than exploit, to lift up rather than tear down.
As the meeting finally concluded and various participants dispersed to their respective lives, Emma approached Marcus with an expression that mingled relief with something deeper. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for helping me breathe that first night, for refusing to be bought, for standing here tonight even when it would have been safer to disappear." Marcus shook his head. "You're the one who saved us both. You risked everything to protect someone you barely know." "I know everything I need to know. I know you're a good person in a world that doesn't always reward goodness. I know you love your daughter enough to work 3 jobs and still find energy to help strangers. I know you see people as human beings rather than assets or obstacles." They parted ways in the marble lobby, their relationship forever changed by the collision of their worlds. Marcus returned to his night shift routine with the knowledge that Emma had chosen justice over family peace, truth over comfortable lies. Emma went home to face whatever consequences awaited her, challenging her father's authority. But both carried with them the understanding that sometimes the most important victories weren't measured in profit margins or stock prices, but in the simple affirmation that human dignity was worth defending, regardless of the cost. The building settled into its nighttime quiet around them, its marble floors and steel beams holding space for a story that would ripple outward in ways neither of them could yet imagine. 6 months after the midnight confrontation in Conference Room C, the changes were subtle but unmistakable to anyone who understood the rhythms of Hartwell Industries. Marcus noticed them first in small gestures, the way security guards nodded to him with something approaching respect, how Miss Morrison asked about Lily's progress in school, the mysterious appearance of better health insurance coverage that no one in HR would explain directly. But the most significant change was Emma herself. Gone was the fragile teenager who hyperventilated against the floor-to-ceiling windows. In her place stood a young woman who moved through the corporate hallways with purposeful confidence, carrying herself like someone who had discovered the difference between inherited power and earned authority. Their friendship had evolved into something carefully calibrated to survive corporate scrutiny while honoring the genuine connection that had formed during those first vulnerable moments. Emma would stop by the electronics repair shop during her lunch breaks, ostensibly to discuss psychology research projects, but actually to share stories about her college preparation and listen to Marcus's updates about Lily's latest scientific experiments. Jen had become an unlikely ally in maintaining their connection, his repair shop serving as neutral territory where a CEO's daughter and a janitor could share coffee and conversation without triggering corporate security protocols. The elderly shop owner treated Emma with the same matter-of-fact kindness he showed all customers, asking about her studies while teaching her to solder simple circuits.
The comment represented a fundamental shift in Richard's understanding of leadership, influenced by his daughter's willingness to risk everything to protect someone who couldn't protect himself. He began asking different questions in board meetings, pushing back against proposals that prioritized short-term profits over long-term employee welfare. The changes were noticed throughout the company. Rosa Martinez mentioned to Marcus that overtime policies had become more generous, that the night shift workers were receiving better equipment and more comprehensive training. Carlos Rodriguez had been offered tuition assistance for his accounting certification, part of a new program that seemed designed to help immigrant employees rebuild the professional careers they had lost. "Someone upstairs is paying attention to the people who actually keep this building running," Rosa observed during their break room conversations. "I don't know what changed, but something did." Marcus knew what had changed, though he couldn't explain it without violating the confidentiality agreements that protected all parties involved. Emma's stand for justice had created ripple effects throughout the corporate structure, challenging assumptions about the relationship between power and responsibility. The most dramatic example came when Hartwell Industries faced a major decision about the Memphis division, the same layoffs that had triggered Emma's panic attack during the board meeting months earlier. This time, instead of viewing 300 employees as expendable line items, the executive team spent weeks developing alternative solutions. Emma, now officially interning in the company's strategic planning department as part of her senior year independent study, had been invited to observe the decision-making process. Marcus learned about the meeting's outcome through their coded conversations at Jin's shop. "They found a different way," Emma told him, her voice bright with satisfaction as she practiced replacing a smartphone screen. "Instead of layoffs, they're investing in retraining programs and expanding the Memphis facility to manufacture components for renewable energy systems. It costs more up front, but it preserves jobs and positions the company for growth in sustainable technologies." The decision represented everything Emma had argued for during her panic attack during the board meeting months earlier. The possibility of making business choices that honored both profit motives and human dignity. It wasn't a complete transformation of corporate capitalism, but it demonstrated that alternative approaches were possible when leaders were willing to think beyond quarterly earnings reports. Marcus felt profound pride in Emma's development, watching her transform inherited privilege into purposeful action. But he also recognized that their unusual friendship had changed him as well, pushing him to think more ambitiously about his own future and his daughter's possibilities. With his job security assured and his relationship with building management improved, Marcus had begun taking evening classes toward completing his engineering degree. The coursework was challenging after so many years away from academia, but Jin had encouraged him to pursue his original career goals. "You have engineer's mind. Waste to spend old time mopping floors when you could design better floors." Lily had been thrilled by her father's return to school, helping him with homework assignments and celebrating his progress on exams. At 9 years old, she understood that education represented possibility, that her father's sacrifice to complete his degree would create opportunities for both of them. "Dad, when you become a real engineer, will you design robots that can help people?" "What kind of help?" Marcus asked, looking up from his calculus problems. "Robots that can tell when someone is sad and know exactly what to say to make them feel better," Lily replied with the casual wisdom of childhood. "Or robots that can fix broken hearts like you fixed that broken radio."
Marcus smiled, recognizing his daughter's intuitive understanding that the most important engineering challenges weren't technical, but human. "I think the robots that fix broken hearts are called friends, sweetheart, and they're much better than any machine I could design." The conversation reminded Marcus of Emma's observation about finding joy in small things, about the importance of human connection in a world increasingly dominated by efficiency and automation. Their friendship had taught him that social barriers were often more fragile than they appeared, that kindness could bridge gaps that seemed insurmountable. As autumn turned to winter, Emma began the intense process of college applications and interviews. Her top choice was a progressive business program that emphasized stakeholder capitalism and sustainable development, concepts that would have seemed alien to her father's generation but felt essential to her vision of responsible leadership. During one of their conversations at Jin's shop, Emma shared her anxiety about leaving New York and the support system she had built. "I'm worried about losing touch with real people," she admitted, her hands steady as she worked on a complex circuit repair. "College will surround me with other privileged kids who have never had to think about the consequences of their comfort. How do I stay grounded in that environment?" Marcus considered the question carefully, recognizing that Emma's concern reflected genuine wisdom about the corrupting effects of isolated privilege. Maybe the answer isn't avoiding privilege, but using it intentionally. Maybe your job is to be the voice in those rooms, reminding everyone that business decisions affect real families, real communities. "But what if I forget? What if the pressure to fit in makes me become someone I don't want to be?" "Then you remember this," Marcus said, gesturing around Jin's cluttered shop with its broken electronics and patient repairs. "You remember that the most important work happens when people take time to fix what's broken instead of throwing it away. You remember that everyone deserves the kind of help you gave me that night in the conference room." Emma nodded, understanding that Marcus was offering her a moral compass for navigating the complex terrain of elite education and corporate responsibility. Their friendship had become an anchor point, a reminder of the values that had prompted her to risk everything for a stranger's dignity. As autumn deepened and Emma's high school graduation approached, both she and Marcus recognized that their friendship was approaching another transformation. College would take Emma to California, where she'd been accepted into Stanford's innovative program combining business administration with social impact studies. The physical distance would make their casual coffee meetings impossible, but both were determined to maintain the connection that had changed their lives. "I want to do something before I leave," Emma told Marcus during one of their final meetings at Jin's shop. "Something that honors what we've learned together." She had been working on a proposal for months, developed with the help of her father's strategic planning team and refined through conversations with Marcus about the practical needs of working families. The Hartwell Foundation, the family's charitable organization, would launch a new initiative providing educational scholarships and emergency financial assistance to children of service workers in major Manhattan office buildings. "We're calling it the Dignity Fund," Emma explained, her voice carrying the excitement of someone who had discovered how to transform abstract values into concrete action. The fund would provide college scholarships for children like Lily, emergency assistance for families facing medical crises, and professional development opportunities for workers seeking to advance their careers. It represented Emma's attempt to institutionalize the kind of individual kindness that Marcus had shown her, creating systematic support for the invisible workforce that made corporate success possible. "The first recipient," Emma continued with a smile that reached her eyes, "will be Lily Chen for her outstanding academic achievement and her father's exemplary service to the Hartwell Industries community." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion as he absorbed the implications of Emma's gift. The scholarship wouldn't just pay for Lily's future education, it would provide recognition for their family's dignity, acknowledging that a janitor's work had value beyond its immediate economic function. "You don't have to do this," Marcus said, though his voice carried gratitude rather than protest. "Yes, I do," Emma replied firmly. "Not because I owe you anything, but because it's the right thing to do. Because Lily deserves every opportunity to pursue her dreams, just like any other brilliant 9-year-old. And because you taught me that leadership means lifting people up, not just climbing higher yourself." The Dignity Fund was announced at a small ceremony in Hartwell Industries' main conference room, attended by building service workers, their families, and select members of the corporate leadership team. Richard Hartwell presented the first scholarship to Lily personally, his speech acknowledging the essential contribution of all building employees to the company's success. Marcus watched his daughter accept the scholarship with the poise of someone who had never doubted her own worth, her small hands steady as she shook hands with one of the most powerful men in Manhattan. The moment felt like validation of everything he had tried to teach her about dignity, respect, and the importance of education. "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell," Lily said with perfect politeness. "I'm going to study engineering like my dad, but I want to design systems that help people instead of just making money. Dad says the best solutions fix problems for everyone, not just the people who can afford them." The comment drew appreciative laughter from the audience and a thoughtful nod from Richard Hartwell, who seemed to recognize his own daughter's influence in Lily's worldview. Emma beamed with pride, understanding that her investment in the Chen family was already generating returns in the form of another generation committed to ethical leadership. After the ceremony, as families mingled over coffee and cake, Emma found herself in conversation with Rosa Martinez, whose grandson would be the fund's second scholarship recipient. "You know, Miss Emma," Rosa said with the comfortable authority of someone who had raised 7 grandchildren, "your friend Marcos, he talks about you like your family, says you taught him that kindness isn't weakness, that standing up for what is right is always worth the risk." Emma felt warmth spread through her chest as she absorbed Rosa's words. "He taught me the same thing, that helping someone when they're drowning isn't charity, it's just being human." "Exacto," Rosa nodded with satisfaction. My abuela used to say that when the rich people and poor people really see each other, that's when the world starts to change. You two, you see each other. That's why this fund will work, because it comes from seeing, not just giving. As the celebration wound down and families headed home to their various neighborhoods throughout the city, Marcus found Emma standing at the conference room windows, looking out at the city lights that had witnessed their first conversation months earlier. "Any regrets?" he asked, joining her at the window. "None," Emma replied without hesitation. "My life is completely different because of that night when I couldn't breathe. Better different, more honest different." "Mine too," Marcus acknowledged. "I thought helping you would be a simple thing, just first aid for a panic attack. I never imagined it would lead to all this." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city pulse with life below them. The building around them hummed with the same energy as always, but their relationship to it had fundamentally changed. Marcus was no longer just a janitor maintaining anonymous spaces. He was a valued member of a community working towards something larger than individual success. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from her driver, indicating it was time to head home. As she gathered her things, she turned to Marcus with an expression that mingled sadness with determination.
"I'm going to miss our conversations," she said, "but I want you to know that everything I do from now on will carry part of what you taught me, about dignity, about seeing people clearly, about the courage it takes to care about strangers. And everything I build from now on will carry what you taught me," Marcus replied, "about using whatever power you have to lift others up, about refusing to accept that the world has to be cruel, about the possibility of making business decisions that honor human value." They embraced briefly, a gesture that would have seemed impossible during their first meeting, when social barriers had made even conversation feel dangerous. Now it felt natural, the affection between friends who had chosen to see past circumstances to the people beneath. 3 months later, as Emma packed for college and Marcus prepared for his final semester of engineering coursework, both carried with them the knowledge that their friendship had created something larger than their individual transformation. The Dignity Fund had processed applications from hundreds of families, providing scholarships, emergency assistance, and professional development opportunities that created ripple effects throughout New York's service worker community. Other corporations had begun implementing similar programs, recognizing the strategic value of supporting their workforce beyond basic employment requirements. The business case for stakeholder capitalism was becoming impossible to ignore, driven partly by a new generation of leaders who understood that sustainable success required attention to all participants in the economic ecosystem. Emma's departure for Stanford was marked by a farewell gathering at Jin's electronics shop, where the entire informal community that had grown around their friendship came together to wish her well. Jin presented her with a perfectly restored vintage radio, its brass fittings gleaming and its sound crystal clear. "For remembering," Jin said simply. "Beautiful things come from patient work, careful attention to details. Same with people, same with companies." As Emma's flight prepared to take off from JFK, carrying her toward a future filled with possibility and responsibility, Marcus received a text message that made him smile. "Thank you for teaching me how to breathe. Time to go change the world. Your friend, E." The city lights sparkled below the departing plane, each point of illumination representing a life touched by the simple decision to help someone who was drowning. Emma looked down at the vast metropolitan landscape and felt not homesickness, but gratitude, for the friendship that had saved her, for the lessons learned in marble hallways and electronic shops, for the understanding that true wealth was measured not in assets, but in the number of people whose lives you had helped improve. Marcus finished his shift that evening with a sense of completion that had nothing to do with mopped floors or emptied trash cans. The building around him felt different, Not because its physical structure had changed, but because the relationships within it had been transformed by one teenager's determination to turn inherited privilege into purposeful action. As he rode the late train back to Queens, Marcus thought about Lily's college fund, now secure thanks to Emma's scholarship program. He thought about his engineering degree, nearly complete after years of night classes. He thought about the possibility of designing systems that would help people instead of just generating profits. Most of all, he thought about the night a scared 17-year-old taught him that sometimes the most important repairs involve not machines or buildings, but the human capacity for seeing dignity in unexpected places and having the courage to defend it against overwhelming odds. The city settled into its midnight rhythms around them all, its heartbeat steady and strong, enriched by the knowledge that kindness could indeed bridge any gap, that courage could transform any circumstance, and that the most powerful force in any building was the simple decision to treat every person as worthy of respect and care.
5 years later, Emma Hartwell Chen stepped out of the black sedan that had delivered her to the familiar granite steps of Hartwell Industries, her Stanford MBA tucked securely in her briefcase alongside the business plan that would reshape her family's corporate legacy. At 22, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had learned to transform inherited power into purposeful action. Her professional attire tailored but not ostentatious. Her presence commanding without demanding deference. The hyphenated surname had been her idea, adopted legally 6 months earlier as a tribute to the friendship that had changed her life's trajectory. Richard Hartwell had initially objected to the addition, viewing it as unnecessary sentimentality, but had gradually come to understand his daughter's need to honor the relationship that had taught her the difference between authority and leadership. The building's marble lobby buzzed with the controlled energy of corporate success, but Emma noticed details that would have escaped her attention 5 years earlier. The security guards smiled genuinely as they greeted her, their interactions reflecting the cultural changes that had rippled through the organization since the Dignity Fund's implementation. The maintenance staff moved through their responsibilities with visible pride, their uniforms bearing discreet patches acknowledging their essential contribution to the building's operation. Emma's destination was the 52nd floor, where the executive conference room awaited her presentation to the board of directors. Today marked her formal entry into the company's leadership structure, but more importantly, it represented the culmination of years spent preparing to implement a vision of corporate responsibility that honored both profitability and human dignity. The presentation materials spread across her father's desk told a story of transformation that extended far beyond individual lives. The Dignity Fund had processed over 3,000 applications in 5 years, providing scholarships, emergency assistance, and professional development opportunities that had created measurable improvements in employee retention, productivity, and community relations. What had begun as Emma's attempt to protect Marcus had evolved into a comprehensive program that other corporations were studying and replicating. "The numbers are remarkable," Richard Witt admitted, as he reviewed Emma's analysis of the program's impact. Employee satisfaction scores have increased by 37%. Turnover in support positions has dropped to the lowest levels in company history, and the public relations value has been incalculable. But Emma's presentation went deeper than statistics, incorporating research from her Stanford thesis on stakeholder capitalism and sustainable business practices. She had spent 2 years studying companies that had successfully balanced profit motives with social responsibility, developing frameworks that could be scaled across Hartwell Industries' entire corporate structure. "I'm not proposing charity, Dad," Emma explained as they prepared for the board meeting. "I'm proposing enlightened self-interest. Companies that invest in their entire workforce ecosystem outperform traditional profit maximization models over the long term. We have 5 years of data proving that dignity-centered policies create competitive advantages."
The board meeting that followed was unlike any in Hartwell Industries' history. Emma presented her findings with the authority of someone who had studied both theory and practice, her arguments buttressed by concrete examples of policy changes that had generated measurable returns on investment. But her most powerful evidence was testimonial, stories of employees whose lives had been transformed by programs that recognized their full humanity. "I'd like to introduce someone who embodies the success of our stakeholder approach," Emma announced, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned to command rooms filled with powerful people. Marcus Chen joined our company as a night shift janitor 5 years ago. Today, he serves as our Director of Facilities Engineering, overseeing sustainable infrastructure projects that have reduced our environmental footprint by 23% while creating new revenue streams in the renewable energy sector. Marcus entered the conference room wearing the professional attire of senior management, but carrying himself with the same dignity that had impressed Emma during their first encounter. His transformation from janitor to executive represented more than individual advancement. It demonstrated the untapped potential that traditional corporate hierarchies routinely overlooked.
5 years ago, Marcus addressed the board with the calm authority that had once helped a panicking teenager learn to breathe. "I was mopping these floors while pursuing an engineering degree at night. The Dignity Fund provided tuition assistance that allowed me to complete my education, but more importantly, it created a culture where merit and potential were recognized regardless of an employee's starting position." He outlined the sustainable infrastructure projects that had emerged from his unique perspective as someone who understood the building systems from the ground up. His team had implemented energy-efficient technologies, waste reduction programs, and water conservation measures that had generated millions in cost savings while positioning Hartwell Industries as a leader in corporate environmental responsibility. "The most valuable resource in any organization," Marcus concluded, "is human potential. When you create systems that allow people to grow, to contribute their best thinking, regardless of their job title, you unlock innovations that wouldn't be possible in traditional hierarchical structures." The board voted unanimously to expand Emma's stakeholder-centered policies throughout the corporation's operations, recognizing that the pilot programs had generated results that exceeded traditional performance metrics. The decision represented a fundamental shift in corporate philosophy, driven by evidence that treating employees as whole human beings rather than expendable resources created measurable competitive advantages. 2 years later, Lily Chen graduated summa cum laude from MIT with degrees in environmental engineering and business administration, her commencement speech focusing on the responsibility of technical professionals to design solutions that served entire communities rather than privileged elites. At 19, she possessed her father's analytical precision combined with a social consciousness shaped by growing up in a household where conversations about justice and dignity were as common as discussions about homework and career planning. Her senior thesis had developed innovative water purification systems for underserved communities, combining advanced filtration technology with business models that made the solutions economically sustainable. The project had attracted attention from development organizations and impact investors, leading to job offers from both prestigious engineering firms and social entrepreneurship programs. "I want to work on problems that matter," Lily explained to her father as they celebrated her graduation. "You and Emma taught me that the best engineering doesn't just make things work better, it makes life better for people who need help the most." Marcus felt profound pride as he watched his daughter field inquiries from potential employers, recognizing that her opportunities were the direct result of Emma's scholarship program, but also understanding that Lily's achievements reflected her own brilliance and determination. The scared single father who had once wondered how to pay for his daughter's education now watched her choose between multiple paths to success. Whatever you decide, remember that the most important measure of success isn't what you achieve for yourself, but what you make possible for others. 3 years later, the Hartwell Institute for Stakeholder Capitalism opened its doors on the campus of Columbia Business School, funded by a $50 million endowment from the Hartwell Foundation and designed to train the next generation of corporate leaders in dignity-centered business practices. Emma served as the founding director of the institute, her role combining teaching, research, and consulting with corporations seeking to implement stakeholder-oriented policies. The institute's curriculum drew heavily from the case study of Hartwell Industries' transformation, but also incorporated examples from other companies that had successfully balanced profitability with social responsibility.
Business education has traditionally taught students to maximize shareholder value as the primary measure of success. Emma explained to the Institute's first cohort of students, "We're teaching you to maximize stakeholder value, to consider the full ecosystem of interests that are affected by corporate decisions." Marcus frequently guest lectured at the Institute, sharing insights from his unique perspective as someone who had experienced corporate culture from multiple hierarchical levels. His presentations focused on the practical implementation of stakeholder policies, the importance of employee voice in organizational decision-making, and the innovation potential that emerged when companies invested in human development. The most sustainable competitive advantage, Marcus would tell students, comes from creating organizations where every person can contribute their best thinking. When you limit input to people at the top of the hierarchy, you're ignoring the perspectives of people who understand your operations most intimately. The Institute's research generated influential publications that shaped corporate policy discussions, but its most significant impact came through the leaders it trained. Graduates carried stakeholder-centered approaches into positions throughout the business world, creating ripple effects that gradually shifted industry standards toward more comprehensive definitions of success. 5 years later, Richard Hartwell announced his retirement at 72, ceding control of the company to Emma while transitioning to emeritus status as chairman of the Hartwell Foundation. The succession had been planned for years, but the timing coincided with Emma's engagement to Dr. Michael Santos, a physician who ran free clinics in underserved communities and shared her commitment to using privilege as a tool for social justice. The engagement party, held in the renovated employee cafeteria where Emma and Marcus had conducted their first real conversation, brought together the extended community that had grown around their friendship. Jin Watanabe, now 84 and still repairing electronics with patient precision, served as an unofficial master of ceremonies, his brief toasts reflecting the wisdom that had guided multiple generations of relationships. "Love is like circuit repair," Jin announced to the gathered crowd, "must find right connections, treat broken parts with care, always check that power flows to all components. Emma-san and Michael-san, they understand this. Together, they fix things that matter." Rosa Martinez, now a grandmother of 12 and the Dignity Fund's community outreach coordinator, presented Emma with a hand-knitted shawl that had been worked on by dozens of building employees and their families. Each section represented a different story of transformation. Scholarships earned, medical emergencies weathered, careers advanced through professional development programs that had grown out of Emma's original vision. "This is from all of us," Rosa explained, her voice thick with emotion. "Every stitch represents someone whose life got better because you decided that caring about people wasn't weakness, it was strength." Marcus, now serving as Hartwell Industries Vice President of Sustainable Operations, offered a toast that captured the essence of their remarkable journey. 10 years ago, a scared teenager taught a grieving janitor that sometimes the most important work involves helping people remember how to breathe. Tonight, we celebrate the fact that kindness can indeed change the world, one relationship at a time. 10 years later. The phone call came at 6:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, interrupting Emma's morning routine of reviewing sustainable development reports while her toddler son played with blocks that spelled out environmental statistics in bright primary colors. The caller was Dr. Patricia Valdez, the grief counselor whose techniques enabled Marcus to help Emma during her first panic attack. "I'm calling because you and Marcus were mentioned in research I'm publishing about the long-term impact of crisis intervention. Your story has become a
Study for how individual acts of compassion can create systemic change. I wanted your permission to include specific details about your friendship in the publication. Emma agreed immediately, understanding that their story might offer hope and guidance to others facing similar struggles with mental health, social inequality, or the challenge of using inherited privilege responsibly. The research would document how a single moment of human connection had generated ripple effects that touched thousands of lives over the course of a decade. The published study, titled Breathing Room: How Crisis Intervention Can Catalyze Social Transformation, became required reading in social work programs, business schools, and leadership development curricula. It traced the connection between Marcus's grounding techniques and Emma's panic attack through the creation of the Dignity Fund, the transformation of Hartwell Industries' corporate culture, the establishment of the Stakeholder Capitalism Institute, and the broader shift toward dignity-centered business practices across multiple industries. But the study's most significant finding was its documentation of intergenerational impact. Lily Chen, now Dr. Lily Chen, had founded a nonprofit organization that provided engineering solutions to communities affected by climate change. Her work directly influenced by conversations about justice and responsibility that had begun in her childhood. Emma's son, though only 4 years old, was already learning about the importance of treating all people with respect. His bedtime stories featuring characters who solved problems through kindness rather than conquest. The most remarkable aspect of this case, Dr. Valdez concluded in her research, is how a single intervention during a mental health crisis created a cascade of positive change that continues to generate benefits for new generations. It demonstrates that individual acts of compassion, when properly supported and amplified, can indeed transform institutional structures and cultural norms. 15 years later, the dedication ceremony for the Marcus Chen Center for Dignity in the Workplace drew attendees from across the corporate world. Representatives from universities, nonprofit organizations, and government agencies interested in the center's research on employee well-being and organizational justice. The facility, housed within Hartwell Industries' expanded campus, combined research laboratories with training facilities designed to help companies implement stakeholder-centered policies. Marcus, now 54 and serving as the center's executive director, stood before the assembled crowd with the same calm presence that had once helped a panicking teenager learn to breathe. His opening remarks focused not on his personal transformation, but on the collective achievement represented by the center's mission. 15 years ago, Marcus began, I learned that the most important engineering challenge isn't technical, it's human. How do we design systems that recognize the full dignity of every person who participates in them? How do we create organizations where kindness is considered a strategic advantage rather than a luxury we can't afford? Emma, now 37 and recognized as one of the leading voices in stakeholder capitalism, served on the advisory board while continuing her work as CEO of Hartwell Industries and director of the Business Ethics Institute. Her introduction of Marcus emphasized the collaborative nature of their achievement, the way their friendship had created something larger than either could have accomplished individually. Marcus taught me that leadership isn't about commanding from above. It's about creating space for other people to breathe, to grow, to contribute their best thinking to collective challenges. The center we're dedicating today exists because one janitor decided that helping a stranger was more important than protecting himself from complications. The center's research focused on developing practical tools for implementing stakeholder-centered workplace policies, but its most significant contribution was cultural, demonstrating that business success and human flourishing were not competing objectives, but complementary outcomes of well-designed organizational systems.
20 years later. The documentary Breathing Room:
How a Panic Attack Changed Corporate America premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, its narrative following the 20-year arc from Emma's breakdown in the marble hallway to the widespread adoption of stakeholder capitalism principles across major industries. The film interviewed employees, executives, researchers, and community members whose lives had been touched by the ripple effects of that original moment of human connection. The most powerful segment featured Lily Chen, now an internationally recognized expert in sustainable engineering, discussing how her childhood in the Dignity Fund community had shaped her understanding of professional responsibility. At 34, she had founded 3 companies focused on environmental justice, each one designed to prove that profitable businesses could simultaneously address systemic inequalities. "I grew up understanding that business could be a force for justice," Lily explained to the documentary filmmakers. "My father and Emma showed me that the most successful organizations are the ones that invest in human potential, rather than extracting maximum value from human labor." The film also featured Richard Hartwell, now 82, and reflecting on how his daughter's crisis had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about corporate culture and family relationships. His transformation from a traditional profit-maximizing CEO to an advocate for stakeholder capitalism represented the broader generational shift that had reshaped American business practices. "I thought I was protecting Emma by teaching her to be strong," Richard admitted in his interview. "But she taught me that true strength comes from vulnerability, from admitting when systems are broken and having the courage to fix them." The documentary's final scenes showed the current state of Hartwell Industries, now a certified B Corporation with policies that balanced shareholder returns with employee well-being, environmental sustainability, and community development. The company had become a model for other organizations seeking to implement stakeholder-centered approaches. Its success measured not only in financial returns, but in the quality of life it created for all participants in its ecosystem. 25 years later. Emma's granddaughter, 6-year-old Sarah Chen Santos, played on the floor of the renovated employee cafeteria while 3 generations of the extended family gathered for their annual celebration of the anniversary of the night Emma learned to breathe. The tradition had evolved into a community celebration, bringing together hundreds of families whose lives had been touched by the programs and policies that had grown out of that original moment of crisis intervention. Marcus, now 74 and officially retired but still volunteering as a mentor for young engineers, watched Sarah build elaborate structures with blocks while her great-uncle Lily, now Aunt Lily to the newest generation, explained the principles of sustainable design through play. "See how the strong pieces support the ones that might fall down?" Lily asked Sarah as they constructed a tower designed to withstand imaginary earthquakes. "That's how good teams work too. Everyone helps everyone else stay strong." Emma, now 57 and transitioning from active CEO duties to her role as elder stateswoman of the stakeholder capitalism movement, reflected on the quarter-century journey that had begun with a panic attack and evolved into a fundamental transformation of corporate culture. "Sometimes I try to imagine what would have happened if Marcus hadn't been working that night, if he hadn't known how to help someone who was drowning in expectations and fear. How many people's lives would have been different? How many opportunities for justice would have been missed?" But Marcus, ever practical in his wisdom, redirected the conversation toward the future rather than alternative histories. The important thing isn't what might have been, it's what we've learned about the power of seeing each other clearly, helping each other breathe, and refusing to accept that the world has to be cruel. As the evening wound down and families headed home to their various neighborhoods throughout the metropolitan area, the participants carried with them the understanding that their war with inequality was not something to be won or lost in single battles, but an ongoing commitment to creating a world where everyone mattered. The individual stories were part of a larger narrative about the possibility of transformation the ripple effects of kindness, and the way single moments of human connection could reshape entire systems. The city lights twinkled beyond the conference room windows, each point of illumination representing a life touched by the simple decision to help someone who was struggling to breathe. The building that had once felt like a prison of expectations had become a sanctuary of possibility, its marble floors and steel beams holding space for stories of dignity, justice, and the revolutionary idea that treating people as fully human beings was not just morally right, but strategically brilliant. Sarah Chen Santos fell asleep on the drive home, her small hand clutching a block that spelled out kindness in bright red letters, already dreaming of the structures she would build and the people she would help when her turn came to carry forward the legacy of compassion that had begun with a janitor's calm voice and a teenager's willingness to learn how to breathe. The legacy continued, spreading outward like ripples on still water, touching lives not yet born, and creating possibilities that exceeded the wildest imagination of a grieving single father who had once thought his greatest achievement would be helping his daughter grow tall enough to ride roller coasters. In the end, Marcus had been right about the importance of mixing different elements carefully. Sometimes, when the chemistry was perfect and the timing was right, the reaction created something beautiful instead of explosive, something that could change the world one breath, one relationship, one act of dignity at a time.